Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents This Victorian Life, Modern Adventures in 19th-Century Culture, Cooking, Fashion, and Technology, by Sarah A. Chrisman, narrated by Laural Merlington. Webster says, "History is a continuous narrative of events, but I include in mine many private thoughts." James Eagleson, 1884. Author's Note. A careful listener of these pages will notice that the events described are not always recounted in strict chronological sequence. For example, more than a year passed between the day Gabriel gave me my vasculum and our fossil hunting expedition, but it was logical to relate them in the same chapter. This is intended to aid in the easy listening of the book. Life does not always occur in neatly grouped subject headings, but a neatly organized book is a more enjoyable listen than the randomly lumped stream of consciousness that generally constitutes daily life. Of course, the very subject of this book will alert its audience that my nature inclines me to take liberties with temporal chronology. The events in this narrative are all true, and as accurately depicted as my memory can make them. Introduction. The Angels in the Details. All creatures surround themselves with the things that make them most comfortable. In the case of my husband and myself, we just happen to be most comfortable with surroundings more of a 19th-century nature than of a 21st-century one. In technical terms, our life is a long-term experiential study in temporal diversity of culture and 19th-century technology. We study the late Victorian era, the way avid linguists study foreign languages, by interacting with our subject as much as possible. There is no passport for traveling through time, but we do our best. It started with our clothes. When Gabriel gave me a corset on my 29th birthday, I had no idea how that simple garment would capture my imagination and ultimately lead me into a different world from the one I had been born into. A world of ticking clocks and rustling silk, scented by kerosene and paraffin, and inks pressed from the fragrant petals of flowers. It is a world that the modern era is separated from, yet touched by. As historian Václav Smil says in Creating the 20th Century, the fundamental means to realize nearly all of the 20th century accomplishments were put in place even before the century began, mostly during the 3 closing decades of the 19th century and in the years preceding World War I. The 19th century birthed the 20th, and by extension, the 21st. My husband and I have both always loved history in general and the Victorian era in particular. It often seems to us as though everything worth inventing, everything that made the modern world what it is, for good or ill, came into being in the last few decades of the 19th century. When I started wearing Victorian clothing on a regular basis, and we realized how much insight this provided into the everyday lives of the past, we started wondering what other windows were waiting to be opened through the exploration of more elements of the Victorian experience. When we first resolved upon this life, we tried to find other people like us, individuals who viewed the past as a different culture and wanted to comprehend it. Too many academic historians view the past as a dead thing to be dissected and then encased in glass. Collectors often focus on specific items rather than the big picture of the culture that gave those items context. There are certainly some very impressive collections in the world, and we enjoy seeing them when they pertain to our interests, but we have broader goals than collecting for its own sake. The people we find truly anathema are the ones who reduce the past to caricature and distort it to fit their own bigoted stereotypes. We've gone to events that claimed to be historic fashion shows, but turned out to be gaudy polyester parades with no shadow of reality behind them. As we heard our ancestors mocked and bigoted stereotypes presented as facts, we felt like we had gone to an event advertised as an NAACP convention only to discover it was actually a minstrel show featuring actors in blackface. Some so-called living history events really are that bigoted. When we object to history being degraded this way, the guilty parties shout that they are just having fun. What they are really doing is attacking a past that cannot defend itself. Perhaps they are having fun, but it is the sort of fun a schoolyard brute has at the expense of a child who goes home bruised and weeping. It's time someone stood up for the past. I have always hated bullies. The instinct to attack difference can be seen in every social species, but if humans truly desire to rise above barbarism, then we must cease acting like beasts. The human race may have been born in mud and ignorance, but we are blessed with minds sufficiently powerful to shape our behavior. Personal choices form the lives of individuals. The sum of all interactions determine the nature of societies. At present, it is politically fashionable in America to tolerate limited diversity based around race, religion, and sexual orientation. Yet following a trend does not equate with being truly open-minded. There are people who proudly proclaim they support women's rights, yet have an appallingly limited definition of what those rights entail. Currently, fashionable privileges are voting, working outside the home, and easy divorce. Some people would be dumbfounded at the idea that creating beautiful things, working inside the home, and marriage are equally desirable rights for many women. In the 18th century, Voltaire declared, "I disagree with what you say, but I will fight to the death for your right to say it." Many modern Americans seem to have perverted this to, "I will fight to the death for your right to agree with what I say." When we stand up for history, we are in our own way standing up for all true diversity. When we question stereotypes and fight ignorance about the past, we force people to question ignorance in general. Our embrace of historic culture came at a crossroads in our lives, and we found ourselves contemplating the ways in which surroundings affect lives at a time when we were also seeking a new home for ourselves. My husband had recently graduated with a master's degree in library science from the University of Washington in Seattle. A disastrous and very brief move to Washington, D.C., when Gabriel accepted a contract job at the Library of Congress, so strongly impressed the importance of community and surroundings upon us that we practically left skid marks across the country getting back to the Pacific Northwest. The result was that we took a leap, partly a leap of faith in our own determination, but also a leap of hope for what we could accomplish together. We bought an 1888 house in Port Townsend, Washington's Victorian seaport and long our favorite place, and proceeded to see how Victorian a life we could truly carve out for ourselves in the 21st century world. An enormous amount of the infrastructure that supported society and people's everyday lives in the 19th century has vanished. Some disappearances happened long ago. Others are more recent than most people realize. The culture of the past, like any culture, was based on complicated economies and relationships among millions of individuals. Expecting two people to bring back multiple industries that supported millions would be patently ridiculous. Certain exigencies must be accepted because we live in a world as it is, not as we would wish it to be. We are not playing a role, but living a real life, and a lot of that involves working out ways to exist in the world without sacrificing our principles. In this, we are no different from anyone else with strong convictions. I have a degree in international studies, and 4 years into this endeavor, our household reminds me of the many homes of immigrants I have visited throughout the years. Whether they are the homes of expats abroad, or the U.S. households of fresh entries into the American melting pot, settler domiciles always show the cultural identities of those who inhabit them, alongside the inescapable reminders that one has not actually traveled very far. Our personal histories assert themselves, no matter where we are. We all do what we can with what we have to make our dreams come true. Completely shifting our home to embody the ultimate incarnation of our dreams is a lifelong endeavor that we recognize may never be finished. But we continue to move along that long and winding path, and each step we have taken has taught us something about the world that has been, the world that is, and, perhaps, the world that is yet to come. The longer we do this, and the deeper we delve into the minutiae of 19th-century life, the more I see its reflections in the world around me, even outside my home. Traveling through different countries and studying their peoples helped me to see their influence everywhere I turned in my own country when I returned to America. So, too, our investigations through time have brought greater clarity to the echoing refrains of history still ringing in the modern world. People say the devil is in the details, but I contend that a great many angels reside there as well. For one thing, details distinguish cultures from one another and allow us to revel in the great diversity that the human race can manifest. All people have the same basic needs of shelter, food, and companionship. Yet the ways we define and realize these things vary widely. One's specific outlines of their needs define not only their culture, but increasingly specific subsets thereof, narrowing down to the identity that is truly their own. Shelter can be any structure from a palace to a yurt. Food may range from raw seaweed to roast ortolan. As for companionship, it might take an entire network of acquaintances to stave off loneliness from one person, while another is happy nested within a large family, or cuddled close to the heart of one person who means the world to them. For some, all it takes is a pet or a single cherished book. These differences are details, it's true, but they are details that define us and that we, in turn, define through our own choices and resources. What distinguishes a Victorian home from a modern one? The answer is the same as if one had asked what distinguishes any culture from another. Details. These details are too numerous to list, and most, on their own, might seem small to an outside observer. Yet each has a lesson to teach us, just as each individual is a living part of his or her society. Just as hosting an exchange student teaches lessons about another culture, interacting with an artifact from history provides insights into another time. The effect is amplified when exposure intensifies. Many artifacts were designed to function within a specific context and interact with other objects and infrastructure contemporary to themselves. The more one can reinstate an artifact's context, the better it functions and the more sense it makes. Imagine trying to analyze a remote control without access to its corresponding device or the power sources of either. One of my favorite quotes about cultural meanings came from my first French professor on the very first day of class. French people, she told the students, don't say something in French because they mean it in English and just don't know any better. French people say something in French because they mean it in French. To truly comprehend the meaning of something, understanding its context is vital. Traveling to a foreign country is the best way to learn about its culture or language because it places the student in the context of the subject. They are exposed to all the details of life and witness how infinite factors compound each other to form the complex equation of a functioning society. We can't travel to the past, but we can surround ourselves with its details. From the time my husband and I first envisioned this project, we knew that this form of historical education would be the slow and steady work of a lifetime. Someone who is born into a culture emerges into a time and place already surrounded by its details. We would have to slowly reinstate them when this was possible, and compare and debate modern equivalents when it wasn't. For example, no publisher on earth will accept a handwritten manuscript anymore. I keep my daily diary by hand, as well as all my notes, and even draft my manuscripts that way. But when it's time to submit things to my editor, I have to transcribe all that I've written and submit an electronic version. The world is a complicated place. Anyone with a lifestyle that deviates at all from the mainstream must find ways to survive within the existing systems. The key is to not lose sight of one's philosophies in the process, to not lose track of ways those compromises can accord with the ideal. When contemplating the past, many people think only of what it didn't have and consider that temporal difference only means cutting things out. In some ways, this would be easy, but it is the polar opposite of the task that Gabriel and I set for ourselves. Our job, as we saw it, was to put historical elements into our lives so that we could learn from them. Oil lamps, writing tools, period recipes, furniture, advice manuals. We knew all these things had lessons to teach us. The catch was we would have to acquire them first. Just getting hold of something from the 19th century often constitutes more than half the struggle to use it. Before bringing even small, quotidian elements of the past into our lives, we must always deal first with challenges of money, time, and the quirky twists of fate. No one pays us to live as we do or sponsors us in any way. Nor are we even remotely wealthy. Everything we gather is something we've saved for, in many cases for a very long while. Since the items we can afford are not always in the best condition, they often require repairs just to be serviceable. Just learning how to repair them, or finding someone who can, requires research, which, of course, takes time. The things we can make from scratch take time as well. I make all my own clothes, and most take months or even years of work. Even if some beneficent sponsor were to sweep in and shower us with funds, there would still be the quirks of fate to consider. Some items are just hard to find now, period, even if they were common in the past. Ironically, the most common items often become the rarest over time because no one thinks them worthy of preservation. These are the sorts of things it takes patience and luck to find, and we must be quick on our feet about snatching them when they come up. These are all challenges, in some cases very difficult ones, but we never consider them hardships. Seeking out quotidian items from the 19th century and learning how to interact with them properly constitute some of our favorite joys. Gabriel and I both love to learn, and we enjoy hunting together for an ever-deepening knowledge of a period that fascinates us. The late 19th century was an incredibly dynamic time. We focus on the decades of the 1880s and 90s because they seem pivotal. People were dealing with technologies like telephones and ultra-fast mail for the first time, and asking each other for advice about situations modern people still find challenging. The period is a goldmine of advice for issues that remain relevant today. We focused our lens of inquiry upon the late 19th century and began gathering objects to aid our inquiries and be our teachers. The story that follows recounts just a few of our adventures from the first 4 years of this quest for knowledge and what we've learned. 1. A home of a distinct form. Residential buildings profoundly shape the behavior of people. Individuals who live in homes of distinct forms and contents internalize a spectrum of spatial and social rules regarding appropriate activities there. They become socialized via cultural norms and kin, to be sure, but also through interactions with their furnishings and built surroundings. Jean E. Arnold, et al., 2012. I've always loved electrical outages, even as a child. For me, these failures in technology represented not inconvenience or hardship, but much longed-for peace. Growing up in a household where the television was never silent, even while we slept, and always growled in the background, I yearned for quiet. Power outages silenced the television and put the vulturine eyes of all the myriad blinking devices to sleep. What bliss that quiet brought! The gentle glow of lamplight or candle flame seemed almost holy in the solace it offered. I never stopped yearning for that balance between sacred light and velvet darkness, and when I matured, I married a man who understood my sympathies in that quarter. Throughout the early winters of our marriage, we would celebrate the coming of the winter solstice by foregoing electric lights altogether for the weeks between December's first day and the official coming of winter on the solstice. While the pale radiance of our northern latitude grew rarer, and all our friends and neighbors fought the ever-increasing nighttime blackness with blinking strings and streamers of light, we eschewed electric illumination and faced the darkness. The first year we did this, I was deeply struck by the psychological impact of the night. I had not been expecting to be hit so profoundly by the darkness. After all, I had grown up in the Pacific Northwest. A map places Seattle at 47.6 degrees northern latitude, farther north than Maine. Differences in geographical features mean we have less snow than many other locations, but the only U.S. state with longer nights is Alaska. In some ways, the lack of snow seems to make Seattle winters even darker. There is nothing to reflect the sallow moonlight on those long nights, and gray rain clouds hide the wan sun throughout the ever-shortening days. Even when one or the other of those celestial orbs appears through a crack in the slate ceiling that covers us through all those long months, no crystals refract their light. It drowns in the puddles and is swallowed up by the mud. I had understood these things about the light on an intellectual level, and of course discussions about seasonal affective disorder, SAD, and full-spectrum lighting are such popular topics of conversation in Seattle that they grow wearisome. On one of the coldest, rainiest days of winter, a text message received by one of my husband's colleagues ran, "Sitting under sun lamp, gun to head. The Northwest does that to people." Yet I had never truly appreciated the stark difference between night and day when I could simply toggle a switch to convert one to the other. During our first several years of marriage, and thus of this particular tradition, we lived not in the city but in a rural location hemmed in by fir trees, so no metropolitan light intruded upon our self-imposed blackness. In those long weeks of darkness, I caught a glimpse into the minds of our ancestors. The death of the light grows very obvious as one nears the winter solstice in high latitudes. With powerful electric bulbs destroying all distinction between night and day, it is easy to overlook the dying of the sun, simple to dismiss religious light festivals as mere superstition. But when the fallacy of electric light is banished, and one must face the truth of the darkness as humans have done for thousands of years, with only flame between our mortal frames and the night, every lost minute of sun is mourned. The nights grow ever longer as the light dies, and the most stalwart logic cannot completely banish the primal doubt that creeps through the back door of the soul. Will the sun truly return? As we sit through lengthening hours of darkness awaiting an ever-enfeebled dawn, the evidence contradicts our logical argument of a detached notion of planet rotation. The light is not coming back. Winter has given it a mortal blow, and nothing shall ever be bright again. Then solstice passes. The days grow longer. Can words possibly express the absolute bliss of the soul as light returns to the landscape? The relief brought with brightness as logic is affirmed, and celestial bodies proven to be turning in their proper orbits? Never. As humans, we can analyze the phenomenon, we can discuss it, but we can never truly understand it in our souls until we have lived it. We must confront the darkness to know the value of the light. Darkness lends itself well to retrospection. Even while Gabriel and I lived through those powerless nights of winter holidays, we recognized how limited the experience was. Imagine, we would tell each other, What it would be like without any electricity at all. No noisy fridge humming, no modern inconveniences. The idea excited us. Time and again we came back to the topic and had variants on the same discussion. It was inevitable that conversation should lead to the extreme conclusion of the idea. "What if we went all the way?" Gabriel asked, "not just for a specified time, but always. What if we got rid of all the extra modern stuff we don't really need and went back to how people used to live?" "I always did want to live in the 19th century, I said dreamily. "When I was a little girl and my mom took me to the Flavel House Museum in Astoria, I begged her to leave me there." I smiled into the darkness, my imagination split between memories of a girl younger than myself and visions of a century older than my time. I used to dream about what it would be like to live there amidst all that beauty, what it would have been like when the house was new. The Flavel House was the 19th-century home of a wealthy Victorian family, now converted to a museum, all its rooms filled with period artifacts as though it truly were still a bygone era and the family had simply stepped away for a short time. I wanted to stay there, to live there, more desperately than I had ever wanted to be anywhere else. I spent all my allowance on a little scented soap in one of the nearby shops, and after we went home, I used to lie in that old fiberglass bathtub in the house where I grew up, closing my eyes and breathing in the scent of that soap. I would imagine I was in the bathroom of the Flavel house, and the smell of the soap was the ocean air coming through the window. Then I would dream about being out in the rose garden with that same ocean scent all around me. I spent hours thinking about it. I sighed and looked over at my husband. He smiled at me. "Wouldn't it be nice?" "To go back in time? Of course it would." I shrugged in a fatalistic way. "Not going to happen, though." "Why not?" I laughed at the illogical question. "I mean," he specified, "what I was saying before. Why couldn't we just incorporate as much as we can of the past into our lives? Bring back as much of it as we could?" "Okay," I responded flippantly. "I'll stop driving and we'll both give up cell phones." Now it was Gabriel's turn to laugh. The joke, of course, was that I have never possessed a driver's license, and neither of us have ever owned a mobile telephone. As an adolescent, then later in college, I'd never had the money to buy or maintain an automobile, so there seemed very little point in learning to drive one. By the time I could theoretically have afforded a car, I understood how easy it was to do without one. I saw no reason to devote a large portion of my income to a machine whose role seemed to consist of fouling the air, eliminating exercise, and occasionally murdering squirrels and pussycats. I also admit that there was a certain degree of mulish stubbornness at work. Every time yet another person heard I didn't have a license and responded that of course I had to learn to drive, I became all the more determined to prove it is possible for an American to be a fully functioning adult without an internally combusting toy. The story behind our lack of cell phones is a similar one. When they were initially introduced, they were expensive, and when they became cheaper and virtually ubiquitous, society's insistence that they were necessary made me want to prove that this was not the case. Human beings survived quite happily throughout the vast majority of our history with neither motorized vehicles nor mobile phones. They lived, prospered, procreated, and died without the slightest intimation that such things would ever exist. Large numbers of people covering huge swaths of the globe still live without such things. Why so many modern Americans have come to consider them as essential as oxygen is a mystery to me. Just because other people live a certain way doesn't mean we have to, Gabriel continued. It was an affirmation of the sentiment that lay behind my last sarcastic comment and, at the same time, a support of the larger idea he was arguing. Suddenly, our refrigerator started its customary howling. It had a malfunctioning compression coil that went off with increasing frequency to split the air.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?